He lifted his hand to challenge a falsehood and was struck by the sheriff, only for a U.S. official to enter moments later, applauding. You know that feeling when a room gets so crowded you can barely breathe? That's exactly what it was like that Tuesday morning at Jefferson High in Cedar Falls, Alabama. This tiny town where everybody knew everyone else's business, where people still waved at strangers and the local diner served the same apple pie recipe for 30 years. The whole town showed up for what should have been just another boring school event, the yearly Community Pride Assembly. They called it that to honor the local cops, paramedics, firefighters, and a few smart kids who made the honor roll. Nothing special, right? Wrong. Parents were crammed into those uncomfortable metal chairs, sweating in their Sunday clothes. Teachers were running around like chickens, shushing noisy kids and fixing crooked ties. The smell hit you the moment you walked in. That mix of floor cleaner, cheap perfume, and whatever mystery meat they were cooking in the cafeteria. Conversations buzzed everywhere, voices bouncing off the ceiling like ping pong balls. 16-year-old Marcus Thompson stood right up front, hands behind his back, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His mom had made him wear his good shirt, the one with buttons, and those stiff pants that still had creases from the package. His haircut was fresh too, courtesy of Big Mike's shop downtown where he'd waited 2 hours just to get it trimmed. Marcus wasn't scared exactly, more like ready. Like when you know something's about to happen, but you can't put your finger on what. This kid never looked for fights. Actually, he did everything possible to stay out of trouble. Honor student, speech team captain, math tutor for younger kids. Teachers loved having him around because he actually listened and asked smart questions. But something felt different that morning. His grandmother Rosa had gripped his shoulder extra tight when she walked him to school. She didn't explain why, just looked him in the eyes and said, "Keep your head up, baby boy, but be smart about it." He brushed it off at the time. What could possibly go wrong at a school assembly? Up at the microphone, Principal Henderson was fumbling around, making that awful screeching noise that made everyone cringe. "Thanks for coming out today, folks," he started, looking nervous as a cat. "We're here to celebrate our incredible students and the dedicated people who protect Cedar Falls. Please give a warm welcome to Sheriff Dale Morrison." Polite clapping filled the room. A few parents got to their feet. Some kids clapped louder, mostly the ones whose parents worked at the courthouse or knew somebody who did. Then he walked out. Dale Morrison was the type of man who filled up a room just by entering it. Built like a linebacker, military haircut, dark sunglasses, and boots that made noise with every step. He moved like he owned the place, with that swagger some powerful men get. Confidence mixed with something else. Something that made your stomach tighten. "Appreciate it," he said, pulling off his sunglasses. "When they asked me to speak today, I couldn't say no. Because you kids right here, you're what this town's future looks like." His voice carried across the gym like he was used to being heard. "You're tomorrow's leaders. But real leadership means discipline, respect, knowing where you stand, and working your way up the right way." Some heads bobbed in agreement. Parents smiled proudly. But a few teachers exchanged glances, their faces tight with something that looked like worry. Morrison kept going. "Now, when I was your age, we stood up when adults entered the room. We didn't argue with our elders, and we sure didn't try to rewrite history just to make ourselves feel good about things." That line hit the room like a slap. He grinned like he'd just told the world's funniest joke. Marcus felt his eyebrows scrunched together. Something about this didn't sit right. "Too many people nowadays," Morrison continued, "want you to believe this country's nothing but bad guys. That police are always wrong. That slavery built America instead of good old-fashioned hard work and determination." That's when Marcus's hand shot up. Just like that. Calm and respectful, the way his grandmother taught him. But the entire gym went dead silent. That's when you knew something was about to go very, very wrong. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus's voice stayed steady, not shouting, not rude, just clear and confident. Kids turned to stare. Adults shifted in their seats. Over in the corner, Mrs. Patterson, his history teacher, who'd helped him prepare for the state competition, went rigid. She recognized that tone, the same one he used when he was about to prove a point with facts. Sheriff Morrison stopped talking and looked down at Marcus like he'd just found gum on his shoe. "You got something to say, boy?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. With all due respect, what you just said about slavery not building this country, that's not right. There's plenty of proof from economists and historians that shows slavery wasn't just something that happened on the side. It was the foundation of the whole economy, especially down here in the South. To say different than that, Morrison cut him off cold. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. Son, I don't recall asking for a history lesson. The air in that gym got thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, opened her mouth to speak, then froze. Everyone was waiting for someone else to do something, but nobody was ready for what happened next when everything exploded. But nobody said a word. I'm not trying to give a speech, Marcus said quietly. I just believe we should be. You believe, Basquiat? Morrison laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Well, that's your problem right there, kid. You don't get to have opinions when adults are speaking. Some people in the crowd chuckled nervously. You could feel the uncomfortable energy spreading through the room like wildfire. Marcus looked down at his shoes, his face getting hot, but he stayed standing. Sir, I'm not trying to be rude, he said slowly. I care about getting things right. And if we're really talking about being leaders, shouldn't we start by being honest? That was it. Nothing more. The silence that followed wasn't normal quiet. It was the kind where your ears start ringing because it's so complete. You could have heard someone breathe on the other side of the building. Morrison stepped away from the microphone. One heavy step, then another. Now he was standing right in front of Marcus, so close the kid had to crane his neck just to see his face. Those boots made a squeaking sound on the shiny floor. Morrison's mouth twisted into something that looked like a smile, but felt like a threat. You care about getting things right, he said, repeating Marcus's words like they tasted bad. Or are you just trying to show off how smart you think you are? No, sir. You calling me a liar then? No, sir. I'm saying what you told us isn't the truth. Crack. The slap hit like a lightning bolt. Palm to cheek, so loud it might as well have been a gunshot in that quiet gym. Marcus didn't go down, but he staggered backward. His glasses went flying, one side completely broken. He grabbed onto the bleacher to keep from falling. His mouth hung open like all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The crowd gasped. Real gasps, not movie gasps. Short, sharp, shock sounds from every direction. Within seconds, cell phones were up in the air everywhere. You could hear the little beeps and clicks of people hitting record. One mom whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Someone else said, "Oh, no. A kid started crying somewhere in the back. Sheriff Morrison just stood there looking pleased with himself, like he'd just taught the most important lesson of the day. He turned back toward the microphone, wiping his hands on his pants like he'd finished some chore. Then a voice boomed from the back of the gym, louder than any microphone. Clap, 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 3 slow, deliberate claps. Then more. Every single person turned around. Even Morrison stopped moving. That's when she walked through those double doors. You know that moment in movies when time just freezes? When everything goes into slow motion? That's exactly what happened when Patricia Hendricks entered that gym. Tall woman, strong shoulders, hair pulled back tight, navy blue uniform so crisp it looked like it had never been worn. The gold insignia on her collar sparkled under the lights. 2 men in plain clothes followed her like bodyguards. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. She just kept clapping, slow, steady, each clap echoing off the walls like a drum beat, getting louder instead of softer, cutting through every whisper, every shocked breath, every bit of Sheriff Morrison's confidence. His face went white as paper. She walked all the way down to where Marcus was still standing, still shaking, still refusing to back down, even though his cheek was bright red and his glasses were broken. Secretary Hendricks looked at Marcus, then at Morrison. Then she picked up the microphone. "Well now," she said, her voice calm as a lake on a windless day. "That's exactly why I decided to come here today. You could have heard dust settle." Morrison squinted at her. "I wasn't told you'd be attending," he said, trying to sound official again. "Obviously not," she replied. She turned to face the crowd. Parents, kids, teachers, everyone with their phones still recording. "My name is Patricia Hendricks, Secretary of Defense. Grew up right here in Cedar Falls, graduated from Jefferson High in '89, Purple Heart recipient, 3 tours overseas, and I've spent more years than I want to count fixing problems created by men exactly like him." She didn't need to shout. Her words carried anyway. Morrison started to speak. "Now just wait a minute." She held up one hand. He shut up immediately. "I came here to talk about real leadership, about having courage, about what it means to protect a country where every kid deserves to be safe, even in their own school. I was going to tell you students that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary. Her eyes found Marcus again. But I don't need to give that speech anymore, because this young man just showed you exactly what courage looks like. The applause started small but grew fast. Real clapping this time. Not slow and deliberate, but genuine and loud and getting stronger by the second. The applause spread like fire through dry grass. Parents jumped to their feet. Teachers were nodding their heads like they'd been waiting years to see this moment. Morrison started backing up toward the microphone, his jaw clenched tight, looking around for Principal Henderson like he was searching for a life preserver. You folks don't understand the kind of disrespect we have to put up with every single day, he started. You just hit a teenager. Hendricks cut him off, her voice sharp as a knife. On camera, in a public school, for speaking facts. She turned to look at Principal Henderson, who was standing there like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Mr. Henderson, I hope you realize how serious this is, because the Department of Defense sure does. And so does the Department of Justice. Henderson looked sick. We'll be looking into this right away. This is all just a big misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding when everything's recorded, Hendricks said without blinking. She walked down from the stage and went straight to Marcus. You okay, son? She asked. He nodded, though he was still shaking. She pulled a tissue from her jacket and handed it to him. Don't you ever let anybody shut you up for telling the truth. That's how countries fall apart. Marcus swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. She leaned in closer and whispered, You handled that better than most grown men I've worked with. For the first time since it happened, Marcus almost smiled. His grandmother Rosa was standing in the crowd now, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed over her heart. Sheriff Morrison tried to sneak off the stage, but those two security guys weren't having it. One stepped right in front of him, the other blocked the exit. Just like that, the man who'd slapped a kid in front of hundreds of people had nowhere to run. But what came after the cameras stopped? That's when things got really crazy. The video was online before people even left the gym. A kid named Devin, who filmed everything from cafeteria food fights to basketball games, had captured the whole thing on his phone. Perfect angle, steady hands, crystal clear audio. 15 minutes after the slap, it was everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even someone's aunt's WhatsApp group in Atlanta. By the time Marcus got home that afternoon, the video had over 1.8 million views. Sheriff Dale Morrison was trending nationwide, but not for any good reason. News trucks showed up before dinner time. ABC, NBC, even some local station from Birmingham trying to get interviews. Reporters were knocking on doors all over the neighborhood. A guy from CNN tried to talk to the school crossing guard. Kids at Jefferson High were getting messages from complete strangers asking for their side of the story. Marcus's face was all over social media, and while half the internet was calling him a hero, the other half definitely wasn't. That evening, his family turned off all the lights and took turns peeking through the curtains. Not because they were being dramatic, but because someone had already driven by twice, shouting nasty things from their truck window. Another person had thrown a beer bottle with a racist note tied to it onto their front porch. Rosa called the police. They showed up 4 hours later. The cop who came, turns out he'd gone to high school with Sheriff Morrison, and he told them, "We're doing what we can, but you know how these things go." Marcus looked at his grandmother. Her face stayed calm, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She made him sleep on the couch in her room that night, just to be safe. Meanwhile, the school district was scrambling to do damage control. They called an emergency meeting and put out a statement that sounded like it came from a lawyer's office at 2 a.m. We deeply regret the incident that took place on school property and are committed to conducting a thorough investigation. That was it. No names, no real responsibility, just the incident. But inside Jefferson High, everything was chaos. Teachers were whispering in the hallways. Some were too scared to say anything. Others weren't backing down. Mrs. Patterson wore a Black History Matters button to class the next day and dared anyone to tell her to take it off. One of the PE teachers, who used to be a cop himself, got into a shouting match in the faculty lounge defending Morrison. He ended up yelling at the custodian, who'd simply said, "Man hit a child. Nothing to defend about that." During lunch, students were arguing. Some thought Marcus was a hero. Others said he was just trying to cause drama. A senior girl posted on Snapchat, "He should have kept his mouth shut. I don't care what anybody says." Her post got screenshotted and shared so many times she had to delete her account. Even parents in town were picking sides. In the Cedar Falls Community Facebook group, the comments section turned into a war zone. Mrs. Linda, who organized the church fundraisers, wrote, "That boy was disrespected. Period." Another parent shot back, "I was taught to never talk back to adults. Respect works both ways." 12 comments later, someone mentioned something about athletes kneeling during the anthem, and the whole thread exploded. But Secretary Hendricks didn't disappear after her big moment. She held a press conference right there on the school steps 3 days later. "I'm not going to dance around this," she said. "A grown man attacked a student for correcting a lie about history. That's not discipline, that's assault." Reporters were shouting questions left and right. "Are you demanding the sheriff step down?" "I'm demanding justice, real accountability, not silence, not excuses, and definitely not empty promises." She didn't flinch, not even once. That same afternoon, the sheriff's department put out their own statement. Morrison didn't apologize. He said he regretted that the situation got out of hand and claimed he acted on instinct to maintain order. Instinct. Like Marcus was some kind of threat that needed to be neutralized. But inside Marcus's house, they weren't just worried about angry comments online anymore. They were worried about what might happen right there in their own neighborhood. By Monday morning, Cedar Falls felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer right down the middle of Main Street. You had people saying, "That kid's a hero." Finally, someone stood up and told the truth. Then you had others mumbling, "He should have known his place and kept quiet." The divide wasn't always what you'd expect. Black, white, young, old. Some people surprised you. Others didn't surprise you at all. Over at Big Mike's barbershop, where gossip moved faster than the morning coffee, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with scissors. Mike stood by his chair with his arms crossed, listening to Tommy run his mouth while a teenager sat waiting with the cape around his neck. "I'm telling you right now," Tommy said, his voice getting louder, "if that had been my grandson, I'd be sitting in a jail cell today." Mike looked up. "And then what?" Tommy stopped talking for a second. "Then at least that sheriff would know what it feels like to be afraid." The older guys nodded their heads in agreement. But Mr. Williams, sitting in the corner, retired military, lived in Cedar Falls his whole life, just shook his head. Getting mad don't solve nothing. What solves it is making sure they can't get away with it. Use your brain, not your fists. Across town at Maggie's Diner, the conversation was different. Quieter, more careful. A group of church ladies sat with their sweet tea and biscuits, talking in hushed voices. "I just think we don't have the full picture," said one. "Kids these days can be pretty mouthy." Another woman leaned forward. "But he's just a child. That sheriff struck a child." Well, maybe the boy got too comfortable running his mouth. Nobody said it directly, but the way they said "boy" told you everything you needed to know about how they really felt. The mayor called a town meeting that Tuesday night. The place was packed, wall to wall. People were standing in the aisles, crowding the doorway, sitting on the front steps. Every news station within 300 miles had cameras rolling. "I know this community is going through a difficult time," said Mayor Collins, sweat beading on his forehead. "I've known Sheriff Morrison for 15 years. He's a decent man. This is a complicated situation." That's when Rosa Thompson stood up in the fourth row. No microphone, no asking permission, just pure fire in her voice. "Tell me what's complicated about a grown man hitting my grandson." The whole room went dead silent. "I sent that boy to school to learn, not to get attacked, not to be humiliated, not to become some news story. So you can keep your complicated. I want justice." People started clapping. Others just stared at their hands. And in the very last row, Sheriff Morrison sat with his arms crossed and his mouth shut tight. He didn't say one word. Back at Jefferson High, Marcus tried to blend into the background, but that was impossible now. He couldn't walk down the hallway without someone giving him a pat on the shoulder, whispering, "That took guts," or asking, "You worried about what happens next?" He didn't have answers. He didn't want to be anyone's poster child. He just wanted to pass his math test and eat his lunch without drama. But sitting across from Kevin, one of the few kids who always kept it real with him, he got some perspective. "You know you messed up their whole game plan, right?" Kevin said, opening his bag of chips. "What game plan?" "That this school, this town, this whole thing is fair and equal. You stood up and said, 'That's not true.' And that scared them worse than anything." Marcus nodded slowly. "I wasn't trying to start anything." Kevin shrugged. "Starting something usually means you're on the right track." That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Not because he was scared, he'd already faced that part, but because he was starting to understand that something much bigger was happening. His name was showing up in news articles next to words like civil rights and student activism and accountability. He was 16 years old. He just wanted to tell the truth. But apparently the truth made a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. The sheriff's department tried to pretend it was business as usual. Morrison even showed up to work on Wednesday, walking into the station with his coffee like he hadn't slapped a teenager in front of 400 witnesses. But people weren't buying it. 4 officers called in sick. One quietly turned in his badge and resignation letter. The county supervisor scheduled a private meeting to discuss leadership concerns. Meanwhile, parents were calling the school board around the clock. Some were threatening to homeschool their kids. Others were demanding Morrison be arrested. But here's the thing. Arresting a sheriff in a small southern town isn't simple. He was part of the system, not outside it. That's when Patricia Hendricks showed up again. This time at City Hall. No reporters, no speeches, just her and a team of lawyers. She met with the mayor and 4 city lawyers behind closed doors. Nobody knows exactly what she told them, but by Friday morning there was an official announcement. Sheriff Dale Morrison has been placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. He still hadn't said sorry, didn't make any public statements, just disappeared. The rumors started flying immediately. Word was he'd hired some expensive lawyer from Birmingham. People said he was blaming outside agitators for stirring up trouble. Someone claimed they spotted him at Murphy's bar complaining about how his own town had stabbed him in the back. But the spotlight wasn't going away. If anything, it got brighter. Marcus started getting mail from strangers across the country, letters from Portland, from Chicago, even from a retired principal in Nebraska who wrote, "You reminded me why I believed in young people in the first place." Sure, some of the messages were nasty, but most were filled with admiration, support, and hope. Still, Marcus kept his mouth shut until the community forum. They held it in the same gym where everything had started. The bleachers were packed again, but this time for a completely different reason. The school board had invited anyone who wanted to speak to come forward. Marcus hadn't planned on saying anything, but when they called his name and everyone turned to look at him, he got up, walked slowly to the microphone, and took a deep breath. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 16 years old, and I didn't come here to make trouble or be disrespectful to anybody." He looked out at the crowd. "I just told the truth." A couple people clapped. Some nodded their heads. When I raised my hand that day, I thought we were supposed to ask questions when something didn't sound right. Isn't that what school's about? Learning stuff, thinking about things. But instead, I got hit. And now people want to argue about whether that was okay. He paused. Like, my opinion only counts if I say what they want to hear. But that's not respect. That's just being scared. The gym was completely silent now. I'm not mad. I'm not trying to get revenge. But I want everyone to think about what this really means. A kid gets slapped for stating facts. And grown-ups have to have meetings to decide if that was wrong. He stepped back from the microphone. The applause followed him all the way back to his seat. After the forum, Rosa hugged her grandson tighter than she had since he was little. "You didn't just stand up today," she whispered in his ear. "You stood strong." Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, not just relief or nervousness, actual pride. 3 weeks later, Sheriff Morrison turned in his badge. No big announcement, no apology, just a formal letter full of phrases like interference with my duties and personal decision to step away. And just like that, he was gone. But something new had started growing in Cedar Falls. Teachers began changing how they taught history. The school created a student leadership program with Marcus as one of the founding members. And Mrs. Patterson? She got promoted to assistant principal. But it wasn't the punishment that mattered most. It was the change, the crack in the old way of doing things, the truth refusing to stay buried. The day they swore in the new sheriff, Cedar Falls felt different. Not perfect, not completely healed, but different. People gathered outside the courthouse. Some brought lawn chairs. Others just stood around. Not for the drama, but because they actually cared now. Because something had broken open in the town's shiny surface, and people were finally willing to look underneath. The new sheriff was Captain Maria Valdez, a former FBI investigator known for being tough but fair. First Latina woman ever to hold the job in that county. Her first public statement was short and sweet. "A badge doesn't give anyone the right to forget how to treat people, and no kid should ever be scared scared to speak the truth. Back at Jefferson High, things didn't go back to the way they were before, because nobody wanted before anymore. History classes got more honest. Students spoke up more, not less. Teachers didn't just recite facts from textbooks. They encouraged debate, and the school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, started hosting monthly discussions where students could talk about real issues. The first topic: what does respect actually look like? Marcus sat in the front row. He wasn't just another student anymore. He was living proof that truth has power, that courage can come from the most unexpected places, that it doesn't matter how old you are. If you see something wrong, you have every right to say something. But here's what most people didn't know. Marcus still had trouble sleeping sometimes. He still got nervous when adults raised their voices too quickly. And whenever reporters wanted to interview him, he always checked with his grandmother first. "Am I doing it too much?" he asked Rosa one evening as they sat on their front steps, watching the sunset. Rosa set down her coffee cup. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You did something right. Big difference." He nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. The city gave him an award, a ceremony, a college scholarship from some fund nobody even knew existed. But none of that meant as much as what happened on a regular Tuesday afternoon a few weeks later. A kid named Tyler, quiet kid, always ate lunch by himself, walked up to Marcus after chemistry class. He didn't say much, just, "Hey, thanks for what you did that day." Marcus looked confused. "For what?" Tyler shrugged. "For speaking up. I didn't know we were allowed to do stuff like that." Marcus smiled. "We always were. They just tried to make us think we weren't." That hit deep. Later, Marcus wrote those words on a piece of paper and taped it to his bathroom mirror, right next to a photo of Secretary Hendricks shaking his hand. That summer, she came back to visit. Not for the news cameras this time, just a private meeting. Her and Marcus, walking through the empty halls of Jefferson High. "You changed this whole place," she told him. "I didn't mean to," he said. She laughed. "That's usually how real change works." Before she left, she gave him an old book, Maya Angelou, pages worn and highlighted throughout. "Keep learning," she said. "Keep asking questions. And when people tell you to be quiet, talk even louder." Marcus didn't say anything back. He didn't need to. And maybe that's the most important part of this whole story. Because this isn't really about a sheriff, or a slap, or even a school. It's about power, about fear, about how people act when they think nobody's watching, and how quickly that changes when someone starts recording. It's about having the guts to raise your hand when it would be easier to just sit there. It's about the fact that telling the truth, even quietly, even respectfully, can shake the foundation of systems built to keep you silent. And it's about who cheers when that truth gets spoken, and who gets angry. You might never be in Marcus's situation, but someday you're going to see something that's just plain wrong. And when that moment comes, you'll have to decide, am I going to stay quiet, or am I going to speak up, even if my voice is shaking? Because change doesn't start with screaming. It starts with one person willing to say what everyone else is thinking. Maybe that person is you. If this story meant something to you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Ask the hard questions. Listen when other people speak up. And most importantly, support the young people. The truth tellers, the question askers, the ones brave enough to raise their hands. The world needs way more of them. And maybe one of them is watching you right now.